Hello, Courageous Conversation audience. How are you today? I'm Alex Yuin with Juanita More. You want to
Hi,
introduce yourself, Juanita?
how are you, Alex?
Hey, how's it going, buddy?
It's
Good
going
to
good.
see you. Really good to see you. Um, so we decided to do this program because we had an incident when we were doing the People's March in the Castro, and we'll tell you all about it today. And we just felt it was time to confront racism in the Castro. And so the panel today is going to focus on what our experiences are in the Castro and hopefully come out with some actions where you, the audience members, can help with Black and Brown people and Indigenous brothers and sisters, especially our queer and trans brothers and sisters, and hopefully come out with some actions. So let's do this. I'm going to introduce Honey Mahogany. Honey's going to tell you about themselves for the next couple of minutes. Then it's going to be Mason J. And then if DJ Black can get their sound together, then we'll have DJ Black. Right now, they're having some technical difficulties. Juanita, do you have something more do you want to add?
I'm super excited we're doing this, and I love our panel, and I think it's going to be a great chat about what's happening in the Castro.
Right on. Honey Mahogany.
Hi, I am Honey Mahogany. I am someone who was born and raised here in San Francisco. I am a social worker by training and currently work in the realm of politics. But I think first and foremost, I consider myself a drag queen and a trans person. And I have been throwing parties in San Francisco for, almost a decade now. Which feels like a lot, but Juanita, don't start because I know you've much longer. But especially 5 years in the Castro, I threw a party called Mahogany Mondays. So I'm gonna hopefully get to talk a little bit more about that and my experience with that and my experience with gay scene in San Francisco in general.
Okay, why don't we go to you, Mason?
Alrighty there. Hi there. I'm Mason J. Much like Honey, I was born in San Francisco, born in the Mission, raised in Fillmore. I call myself second generation nightlife and queer, as my mom was in the production side of events and nightlife for the 70s and the 80s. And I have also worked in every capacity of nightlife as a go-go, as the hostess, as door person, as a club goer, everything. And yeah, I am an artist and a wordsmith by trade. I also work in the realm of oral history and both LGBTQ archive work. That's where my passion is, and I'm excited to bring a little of that history to this conversation today. I'm queer, trans, two-spirit, and I'm involved in all of those kind of things around town. I'm also deeply invested in harm reduction practices, HIV and STI prevention, land use, and anti-gentrification work. So that's a little bit about where I'm coming from. I've been going out in the Castro literally since I was a child. The running gag was as long as my feet didn't touch the floor, I was allowed in the bar. So everyone carried me around or pushed me while I was sitting on top of bar stools across the bar. Started sneaking into parties, most specifically Juanita's Booty Call Wednesdays when I was in my teens working in the Castro. And that's kind of the summary of who I am. I went out through my 20s in the Castro, and now I'm here to talk about it.
Right on. Thank you, Mason. Hey, Juanita, do you want to give us a little heads up on you and give us a little background? It's now that we don't have DJ Black yet, we'll fill it in with your story.
Sure. I've been doing drag in San Francisco for 30 years now, and I come with a lot of things. I mean, I'm a chef, trained chef professionally, and then decided to do drag and combine those two together, which has been really exciting. I'm also a philanthropist. My annual Pride Party has raised over $600,000 from some super impactful, amazing organizations. I'm super proud of that. I lived in the Castro for a little bit in the 80s, and yeah, I'm a city gal. And I've been here since I was a teenager. So I love this city. I'm born and raised in East Bay and happy to be here.
Yep. Same with my story. I came here as a young kid. San Francisco's my home. And I lived in the Castro. I lived in the Fillmore and the Castro and the Mission. But when I lived in the Castro, I was going to San Francisco State. So it was a whole different scene for me then. And I never really spent time in the Castro because of that. But I still, really project my activism. And I'm really down for social justice, and especially when it has to do with BIPOC.
That's awesome. Love that.
So why don't we get started? I'm sorry that DJ Black isn't with us yet, but maybe they'll get their technical difficulties together. So why don't we start with you, Honey? Tell us about your Castro experience, and especially as being a queen on RuPaul and running your own show in the Castro.
Sure. I mean, my experience, I think, was growing up in San Francisco was a little bit different from Mason's because they grew up, I think, in the nightlife scene, and I felt like I was very sheltered. I grew up on the West Side in the Sunset, very sort of like as far as you can get, I think, from the Castro. And I remember the few times that I would sneak over there, it was always like, very like, oh my gosh, this is like, scandalous or dangerous or like, I don't know, like I was so sheltered that I had no idea what life was like on the east side of the city, and what, amazing adventures awaited me. But when I did get there, when I grew up, I was working at Larkin Street Youth Services, and I started, going out as well. I had a kind of a hard time. I had a hard time finding my tribe and figuring out how I fit into the scene in San Francisco, especially the Castro. I felt really alienated. I felt like people didn't really want to talk to me or get to know me or necessarily date me. But, as long as I was like, but people would like hook up with me. So like it would, especially like through online, like that was very easy. But the hard part was, I think, like figuring out how to fit in and how to like have relationships. And, it's been a long time since I've been in the Castro just to hang out and sort of cruise and meet people. But I think that for me personally, becoming a drag queen, I think sort of changed the game, because instead of just being this sort of like scrawny little like femme Black boy at the time, I was now a scrawny little baby queen, which people probably found endearing to a certain extent. I mean, I thought I was, really like gorgeous and fierce at the time. And then I look back and I'm like, oh my God, girl, that shake and go wig, that no padding.
You look gorgeous.
Juanita More would always say that. And but I started like performing, and that's when I really found my tribe. And, most of it was not in the Castro, most of it was in Soma. The only places that I really felt safe in the Castro and felt welcome were places like Booty Call Wednesdays, were places, and there were a couple parties that were happening at the Transfer at the time, and different places where it was obviously thrown by queer people of color or queer people of color centered. That is where I think I actually felt comfortable and was actually able to make friends and have a good time. And eventually I got on, I got very much became a part of the Moore family, and David Glamour Moore really took me under their wing, and I got a little bit better at drag, and eventually got myself onto RuPaul's Drag Race. And coming out of that show, I was offered a chance to host a Monday night at Midnight Sun in the Castro called Mahogany Mondays. And I think that, honestly, I feel like it wasn't as hard as it could have been. Like, I'm gonna be honest, my experience at the Midnight Sun was predominantly positive as a performer and as someone who had to produce a show there. But I will say that I think that the audience, like the people who would come, I had my people coming, but I had also a whole crew of mostly white gay men who would come, who needed a little more education. And I think that through some of the conversations that I was able to have on stage as a host, making my own mistakes in some of that process, right? And stumbling along with things and evolving as a person, I was able to also allow them to sort of come on that learning journey with me and hopefully really educate my audience and sort of broaden their idea of what it means to be a person of color in queer spaces and a Black drag queen, and what, you know, sort of racism looks like in the queer community. We were able to have those conversations with Sister Roma, with other people. And eventually when I started doing, again, the shows after RuPaul's Drag Race viewing parties, I would do things to highlight women, like having all women in the cast or an all Black show. I called it my Back to Black Nights. And really sort of highlighted, I think, performers of color who didn't get the shine they deserved, you know, in the Castro specifically. In Soma, they did a little bit more, but in the Castro, they were kind of missing because women were not allowed in these spaces or celebrated in these spaces, unless they were maybe trans women, but cis women were definitely not. And yeah, I took it as an opportunity, I think, to book the people, the types of performers that I wanted to see, and to also educate my audience. I also want to acknowledge that as someone who was both a drag queen and, you know, was on RuPaul's Drag Race, I do think that I hold a certain level of privilege, right? I don't think that my experience in the Castro is necessarily the same as every other Black person's experience or even every other Black drag queen's experience. And people may allot me a certain level of deference that they don't give to other people or treat me different or special. And so I don't think that I bear the brunt of the racism in the Castro. I think that my privileged position has allowed me to surpass and to create a space for myself and start a dialogue in the Castro. But what I have seen from other people and other performers and other people of color who are close to me, and what I've heard from them is, you know, really heartbreaking, and kind of brings me back to when I first started coming to the Castro and felt very much alone and not welcome.
So I'm going to switch over to Juanita for a segue from you, Honey Mahogany, because I think Juanita has had, from the stories that you've told me, Juanita, you know, let's jump into how you felt in the Castro, whether you were welcomed or not, and then let's move that into Booty Call and why you started Booty Call.
Sure. You know, when I was coming out in San Francisco, of course, the Castro was a place that I would pass through. But at that time, I was really loving Polk Street. And I just didn't feel a part of the Castro. As a young brown kid, what I looked like wasn't what I was seeing and being represented as somebody who was queer. It was someone who was white, someone who shaved their chest. It was a totally different guy. So I had to figure out how to find my own community. A couple of years later, I ended up moving to the Castro, and I lived there from 84 to 87. So I moved into the Castro right after the AIDS epidemic started. And that was an odd time to make the decision to move there. I was living on Nob Hill before. So bars weren't particularly busy or open. So again, I wasn't really frequenting anything there. When I got back from New York, and God, I probably already had been doing drag 15 years before Booty Call. I decided one night, a bunch of boys were here and we were gonna go out. It was pouring down rain. We took 2 cabs to the Castro and we were gonna go to the bar on Castro. I jump out of the car, pouring down rain. The guy at the door tells me to go wait in line, which there were 2 people in line. And the third person, which would have been me, would have been standing in the rain. So I said, no, I'm gonna just stay under the awning, but I'm the third person. So when that line goes up, I'm gonna hop in that line. He was fine with that. But the boys got out of the cars and were like, Mom, why are you out here? You shouldn't be out here. And they went in and they knew the managers and stuff, and they got me in right away. But something clicked in my head, and I decided I need to be a part of this over here. If I've been doing drag for 15 years in the Castro, and that's the way I get welcomed, then that's not right.
Mhm.
So me, Lalo at the time, Joshua J, we decided to start Booty Call Wednesdays. And that's how it started. And that ran for 8 years. And I feel like it was a place where so many young people were able to be themselves, to figure out who they were. I mean, to this day, I am still the person that seeks out oddballs, the wallflowers. That's me. Those are the people I like to surround myself with. And I think I made some of those people feel super comfortable at Booty Call. So.
And for the audience that's new to who you are and even new to the city, where was the Booty Call Wednesday?
It started off at the bar in Castro, which is in the middle of Castro Street between Market and 18th on the east side. I can't remember what it was before that, but it had been a lot of, I think it was originally called Dirty Dick's.
And then it was called Q Bar.
Yeah, and then it was, the owners changed. Greg Bronstein owned it while it was the bar in Castro. And then 4 guys together, including JB, who owns it now, with Sip Soprano, they took it over. So
Okay, thank you for that. Now I see that we have DJ Black, and DJ Black, can you please tell the audience a little bit about yourself? Maybe take a minute. We're running a little bit behind. If you could give a minute to who you are and why you think you're on this panel, and then we can come back with questions to you.
Well, my name is Black. I've been DJing for 30 years in the Bay Area. Started off in San Francisco through a party called The Blunt, which is Asians, Blacks, and Latins Uniting New Tribes. And I did this because there was no place for women of color to go to that were just for them, you know, where we can play the music that we wanted to play, hip hop. I'm primarily a hip hop DJ, and being a hip hop DJ back in the Castro, back in the 90s, it was very difficult to get anyone to allow for you to play. So I had to create my own space. And we started at Eagle Creek, which is outside of the Castro, but that's what we had to do then. And that's in the 90s, the early 90s. And I'm currently still a DJ.
Right on. Yeah, somebody in the audience said, yay, Eagle Creek. Way to go, Valentine. Tina Valentine. Hey, Tina. Eagle Creek in the house. Thank you for that, Black. And I'm sorry that you had technical difficulties. We'll work on that next time. But thanks for hanging in there, though. So, Juanita, do you want to take over this next section and talk with Mason?
I would love that. Mason, your story to me is really super awesome and special. For someone to grow up in nightlife and in the Castro is an amazing story, and not one that I've ever heard before. So I want to know, I mean, I know that you snuck into Booty Call Wednesdays, and I know that your experience, like everyone's experience, was different. So I want to know what that was like for you.
Yeah, like I said, I started going in the Castro as a young child. My mom was a death doula, and so she was volunteering at Coming Home Hospice. And so I spent a lot of my time playing out on the steps there, or reading in the window, or thinking about when I was going to get older and go to the bars, you know? I always saw the Castro as this kind of magical queer place. I've always been a very queer child in every aspect of my life. And so I started hanging around the Castro in my teens, going to Lyric. And then I decided that like it would be best for me to work there. So once I got out of high school, like I think 2 days after I graduated, I applied for a job across the street from the BOC. It was the bar on Castro at the time. Now it's Q Bar. And so I was like, I'm here. I'm literally in the center of the street. I'm right next to the Castro Theater. I'm going to meet all the celebrities and drag queens. This is great. But at the time, I didn't look like I do now. I was about 200 pounds. I was very masculine presenting. I was female assumed. And it was a really interesting time to be in the Castro, to be perceived as a person of size, a Black woman, and someone whose queerness was indiscernible to most cisgender Caucasian and non-Black people. So I started going to Booty Call because the boys would go over there, and this even taps into something that's an issue in our community around body stuff, is that they would rather eat gelato than eat dinner. And so I befriended a lot of the Castro boys who thought I was just like a gay guy trapped in a woman's body, which was the truth. And I would give them gelato, sorbetos, things like that, because we didn't weigh our products. So I'd just be like, sure, have it, because I thought they were cute. And, you know, I was looking for approval. So I was giving away my resources to get their approval. And then one day someone was like, I bet we could sneak you in. I think they thought I was older than I was because I said I didn't have an ID. I said I lost my ID when they asked about my ID. I said I should come over. And I started coming over, and it was a really interesting experience because we talk about being invisible in the Castro, and I couldn't have been more visible in my idea of myself, but I was extremely invisible, like rendered almost non-existent in the space. And when I was acknowledged, it was for weird reasons. I was often assumed to be selling drugs or doing any number of things that I was not doing. I was kicked out. I was 86 a few times for being drunk, even though I didn't drink at the time. So just like really just enjoying myself, like dancing so hard. People were like, oh, this person must be drunk. We got to 86 her. Let's get this messy lesbian out of here. And so things like that. And then by the time I did come of age, I was like, well, I've been going to these bars for 3 or 4 years now. Surely I'll get some respect. That was not the case. And it wasn't until I started to look more like I do now that I got attention. And it wasn't attention I wanted. It was attention that was very racialized and based on assumptions that were being made about my body, how I liked to play with my partners and things like that. And so I went from this really strange experience of being so invisible I could be in the bar and no one would know I was there, to being suddenly pursued by some of the same people who had been rude to me when they perceived me as a woman. And so that was, for me, like the real eye opener. It was like, oh, the way I'm treated is literally based on how I'm perceived. And my blackness on my female body was like something they didn't want around them. But now that it's being perceived as a male body, it's all they want because of whatever the assumptions they have about what it means to be with me. And so that was, I think that was kind of my experience, and a lot of accusations of stealing and things like that, you know, weird things. When I would get booked to go, you know, I'd come home with maybe $8. The person next to me who had 2 left feet but looked hot, you know, they'd go home with $200-300 and 2 people to sleep with, you know, like, and so that was really hard for me, and it caused me to actually kind of dive into substance use. Like I became a really heavy drinker because I really just wanted to forget that I was being treated poorly or that I was getting weak drinks, or I would have to buy several drinks because my drinks weren't getting poured right.
Huh. I'm going to interject right there with where you said female body, because I had the same incidences that very similar to you, but in my case, it was the asking of 3 IDs to get in, or you know, or if you had sandals on and they would look at your shoes and say, you can't come in because you have sandals on a hot day, right? Then some of the excuses would be that the guys inside wear heavy boots and they might break your toe, type thing. One time we started carrying 3 IDs, and then it was something else. They'd ask for 3 IDs. Oh, yeah, I have that. And then it'd be something else, right? So as a Black woman, I stopped going to the Castro, even though it was my neighborhood. I just didn't feel safe in that neighborhood at all. I didn't even shop in that neighborhood very much. And as you can see, over the course of the years, it really hasn't changed. There's not that many Black ownership. There's not that many Black and brown bodies that walk there. There's not that many, you know, folks that really even that are our skin colors that even respect the Castro. So I hope, you know, through our conversation, we can look at some actions on how this can change. Juanita, you have some more questions for Mason?
Yeah. I mean, I know you were talking about, I wanted you to talk just a little bit about how the Castro played a role in your transition. I mean, that's an important story of change. And it's also something to me that was happening in the Castro. It was starting to happen a lot. And I was starting to see that happen with a lot of friends. So I wanted you to share a little bit about that for me.
Of course, there's a long history of trans folks being in the Castro, you know. Blue Sullivan, who's a transcester who has passed on, did a lot of work in the Castro. It was a place he vied for acceptance. And so even though he was a white trans man, and that's not my experience because I'm not binary identified, I'm non-binary, genderqueer, and two-spirit, and Black and Native, I felt like a kinship and like kind of like I had a roadmap. And it was interesting because oftentimes there were the assumptions that I knew nothing about gay culture and people were trying to pull the wool over my eyes about how things operated. And I was like, oh no, honey, I've been going to bars my whole life. I know how things work. And I think that was really interesting, was that the assumption that someone who's trying to integrate into MSM culture, gay male culture, knows nothing about it if they're coming from a different goalpost. And so that was for me like a lot of dismissal about what I knew. A lot of people were trying to explain things to me, trying to tell me about uprisings that I had even participated in, you know, things like that, try to tell me my history when I had already lived the history and I was just there to like have a drink, you know? I think that was a big thing. And then also, like I said, the physical perception of myself, like I did not know how to handle the attention. So I rejected all of it initially. I was like, okay, like I don't want to deal with anyone in the Castro. I kind of want to duck out of the Castro because it doesn't feel safe to be here. And then, yeah, the treatment I got not only was poor in terms of like the way I was interacted with, it was also poor in the way that the bars were set up. You know, there was a lot of language around the, like what people were doing or what people were there for, or, you know, many times I couldn't use the bathroom I wanted to use. I would be told, go to the women's room, go here, or like, oh honey, you're in the wrong bathroom. And it's like, no, I know where I am. And as long as I'm not peeing in you and you're not peeing on me, and like, if we do decide to do that, as long as it's consensual, it doesn't matter why I'm in here. So that was kind of the way I experienced it, was a lot of, you know, like, you don't belong here. So even when I was considered sexually desirable, and a lot very similar to Honey, like it was only online. People would never talk to me in person, would have long conversations with me online, tell me all about how they wanted to hook up with me. But the second I was in public, you know, it was like they didn't see me and I suddenly disappeared. And it was really strange, you know, to adjust to that. And there's no support for that, is that there are trans people who don't transition and become straight. There are trans masculine people and trans feminine people who are lesbian and gay. And so they're going to want to party amongst their people. Like, what the heck would I look like attempting to go to a straight bar?
And now tell me now how the Castro feels to you.
It's really interesting because I feel like I've had to literally pay my dues. Like, I feel like I do get more respect than a lot of my peers and have an easier time because people have just seen my face so much. Like, I've come in and bought enough drinks over the years that they're not friendly to me, but they acknowledge me. And so it's very interesting. No one's ever friendly. I don't know anyone's name, or they don't know my name. I know everyone else's name because I've been around them for years. And so that's always really interesting. Is that, like, I have a little bit of privilege. You know, Honey was talking about how you can gain a little bit, but it still doesn't cancel out the blackness. So I have the privilege of being served, but not respected. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, I try to only go there to meet people because there's so many people from all over the world. And I tell them about other things to do in San Francisco. That's ironically, before the pandemic, was my Castro role, was I would sit in the bars and tell people where to go to find their people. Like almost like the welcome committee. Like, I see you're traveling here from another place.
You're an ambassador, man.
Yeah, the ambassador of the Castro, the bar ambassador.
We'll have to get you a little badge. I'm going to move on to, you got any more questions for Juanita? Yeah, I mean, for Mason, Juanita?
I love what Mason said.
Yeah, me too. Thank you, Mason. DJ Black, you were saying that you didn't get a chance to play in the Castro. And why do you think that is? Can you be a little bit more explicit?
I'm gonna say because I'm Black. And that's, I mean, that was kind of the name I came up with because I felt that San Francisco in general has a problem with racism, and being queer and being gay and being a woman. I feel like I didn't feel like the Castro, there was just like one night a week and we would go out on Fridays at the cafe, and that was it. Every other thing that went on there was totally male, you know, white male. And that is just, you know, we would go there. It would be a joke to go there. You know, it's like, oh, let's go to the Castro and go to the bar once every week. And once we started throwing our own parties, I think I missed like the whole 90s of the Castro because there was nothing for me to do there. You know, I don't believe that there was a lot of energy that was put into a thought. It was just basically white men. This is what they do. This is their territory. I would go to the Polk Street. And that's just kind of really weird when you think about how Castros seem to be. You know, I came to San Francisco to be gay. I'm from Texas. I'm from Houston, Texas. I'm going to San Francisco to be gay and get to the place that I'm going to be gay at and can't be gay there and can't even be seen there. And that is, you know, really hard when you're thinking about it, when you're like wanting to come somewhere because you believe that they have these particular freedoms, and these freedoms weren't there for me, you know. And I don't, you know, I feel like also because I have played hip hop, and you know, sometimes people don't want to hear the message. There's a lot of good messages about what we're doing. Like, we're telling you as a community what we're doing, and they don't want to hear that. They don't want to hear, you know, they don't want to hear our plight. You know, go over there, shut up, little girl. You know, and you're a woman. I'm not a girl. You know, you think about the way that they would, the words that they would use to try to undermine you as an adult human being. They would call you a girl, not a woman. You know, and I often wondered, you know, what it would have took back in the 90s for us if we wanted to make that happen. And how, you know, like you're saying, you have 2 IDs, you have to have, you know, they would let other people in the bar that didn't have IDs. I mean, and you know, they could say, hey, I don't have an ID, but you have to have 2 to 3 IDs. And there's places we just didn't want to go. We didn't go to Badlands. I don't think I went into Badlands until I was 40, to tell you the truth. So, you know, and I just think that that is a big part of it, is that being Black and being female made it difficult for those 2 things to coincide, because it's very white male and very gay white male at that.
You mentioned Badlands. Can you tell us a little bit about the club that was across the street from Badlands, owned by the same person, but yet it was the Black and Brown club, and then Badlands was the white and Asian club? Can you tell us a little bit about that dynamic?
Well, yeah, I forgot about Eagle. My next door neighbor, who was gay, played there on Friday nights. And yeah, it was kind of like, well, let's make sure we do have them. Let's contain them to this little corner and keep an eye on them. You know, so they're not wandering the streets and trying to go into the other clubs. Let's just make a space for people who are here. You know, and you wasn't really allowed to dance there either. That was the other little tricky thing that was going on with the Eagle, is that they would be like, oh, you know, dancing, we don't want you getting too, you know, worked over here. You stay where you are. You know, you can sit at the bar, listen to the music, tap your fingers, but we don't want you to get up and dancing. They would kick you out the club if you started dancing, which is a part of our expression. How you can tell a Black person not to dance and to a beat that they like? That's just weird. And yeah, so those were the kind of difficult, it's interesting how, like, we don't understand this, how the slave mentality is. It's like slave mentality. They want to give you something, and because they're white, you're thinking they're, like, once again, that they're your allies because they're gay. That is not being shared. And we were told to, like, calm it down, go to this one bar. And I can tell you, I probably went to that bar a couple of times because, like I said, once again, the Castro had that feeling of you not being there. You know, they don't want you there, so why would you go there? And I lived up the street from the Castro.
Yeah. Yeah, the things that, you know, I'm gonna just stay on the bar mentality just a little bit, because we all know who Les Natali is and how he segregated our people from the Badlands and got to a place where we had a protest. And in order to win some of our rights, in order to show him that racism isn't okay, we had to go to that extreme measure to protest and to boycott, et cetera. And that, you know, the power of the people work. Whether it changed or not, it did not really. I mean, he set up some standards where he allowed us to come in, but we weren't treated that well once we were inside. With that said, have you had any of you can answer this question, have either one of you had an experience similar to that, where you've gone in to a bar, they've served you a little bit, if you asked for a shot, they served you half as much as they gave the white boy next door to you. If you know, you were in line, they ignored you or was rude?
Yeah, I feel like that was pretty much every club that we went to, especially it was the other video bar that was across, that's down on the others.
Midnight Sun?
Midnight, yeah, Midnight.
You had trouble with the Midnight Sun?
Yeah, the Midnight Sun, yeah. I remember going in there and just feeling like, oh no, you just got the energy just as soon as you walked in, like, what are you doing here? Like, girl, get up. You know, you need to just turn back around and go outside. It's like, you know, you're like feeling like the 60s all over again with the counters of eating at the counters. They didn't want to serve you food. Like, they didn't want to serve you any liquor. They didn't want your money. It didn't matter if you had $100, $200. They didn't want your money. It was like it was dirty
And
money.
what years was that? Do you remember?
What years was that?
Yeah.
You said? the 90s, the 2000s, even into the,
In the
you know,
2000s as well.
yeah, I would say, I mean, I left the city in 2007 and came to Oakland, but when I was living in the city for 17 years or 18 years, my experience was I could probably go to a straight club and have a better experience than I could if I wasn't going to go to the Castro. And so going to the Midnight Sun or going to Badlands, you know, or even going to, I mean, the cafe only on certain nights. Was it cool? You can go, but that was probably the most place that I could ever say that I felt more comfortable in. And I think that's because they had people of color doing stuff there. They had the Hip Hop Mondays, which they promptly shut down after 2 or 3 years, and it was a popular night there. But you know, you have it was always best to, you know, not go there. What's the bar next to the bar on Castro? What's the name of that bar? I've tried to go in there a couple of times. It was a whole bunch of men.
440.
And
440. I was just going to talk about 440.
yeah. That was my experience. It's like, girl, you need to get the looks, and they'll tell you, and they'll try to tell you where else to go. Like maybe you want to go somewhere else. People suggesting another place to go, and I'm like, well, I did sit my ass in the seat, right? So I want a drink to be served from me here, but no.
That's happened to me a couple of times where they go, "Are you in the wrong bar?" Yeah, there's a women's bar down in the Mission, and it's called this, and this. Yeah, that's happened to me a couple of times.
Yeah, I was going to speak to 440.
Not with my boyfriends, then I get harassed. So.
Yeah, much more recently, I think in 2012 or 2013, had an incident where I was actually called the N-word, like hard R, in 440, and told that my friend and I, who is an API person, and another friend of ours who is mixed, that we needed to take our United Nations meeting somewhere else. And so we reported that to the bar, and they kind of just rolled their eyes at us as if we were inconveniencing them by telling them that someone had just said something very racist, shoved my friend, and told us to take a United Nations meeting somewhere else, you know, in 2012 or 2013, you know, not too long ago. And I was just like, oh, the gall, like we're never coming back to this bar again.
I think that's their intention too.
Juanita, do you have some questions that you'd like to ask?
Well, I mean, what they're both saying is not. It just turns my stomach to hear. And I've seen it. I've seen stuff happen, of course. And you try to curb things, but it doesn't always help. I wanted to know though from you, Alex. I mean, we just did that big march at Pride, which inspired so many people. Everyone felt as though it was really Pride. But we could even go further back when you did the after party for the Dyke March. And I would love to hear from you and how those experiences were for you.
Yeah, I did the after party for the Dyke March on the corner of 17th and Market, and we just took over the Castro. We ended up the Dyke March into the Castro. I would set up a flatbed truck. I'd hire DJ Black and Olga and other people, and we would just play. Now, one of the things, and we did that for many, many, many years, and it allowed Black and brown youth to have an area to go to and celebrate during Pride. But one of the things that never happened, even though we showed that we could bring thousands of people into the Castro, you know, in harmony, having a good time, we were never asked or invited to have any of our after parties in any of the clubs on Castro Street. Even though, like Black was saying earlier, we would try really hard to like sort of have some collaboration for people to go to next, and would never happen. So that was always heartbreaking for me because I knew what that was about. I knew it was about my skin color. I knew it was about the skin colors that we would bring in. And that was a battle always. And that lasted, I mean, I'm with you, Mason. That was as late as the 12, 13s, you know. So, you know, so we had those kind of situations. But with giving a space for BIPOC in the Castro after the party, because most of these kids were young, they couldn't go into bars, or they could and they didn't feel welcome. This gave them a space to have a joyful time for about 3 or 4 hours, and then go home.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
I love that. Creating space is something you have to do. You have to do it. If you
Yeah.
want to see yourself recognized somewhere, you have to create that space.
That's
That's
right.
sort of what I did with Booty Call. I needed to create a space. So
And that's what Honey did too, right, Honey? You
Yep.
created spaces for Black and Brown people as well. You want to talk to us more about that and how you advocated for people of color, especially drag queens?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, you know, being a Black drag queen, and even especially again before being on RuPaul's Drag Race, it wasn't that there weren't opportunities, but there weren't as many high profile opportunities for a lot of Black performers. A lot of the sort of high production shows, or even sort of bigger drag shows, didn't really feature Black characters. And it's true that sometimes I think the producers of those shows would do blind castings and things like that, but there was just a lack of opportunity, period, at that level. You know, once you got beyond the sort of like performing on top of a bucket in the corner of a dark room, once you got beyond that, it was like, okay, all of a sudden it was like, where are the job opportunities? And I remember having a conversation with one drag queen who, had been producing a lot of sort of like story-like shows. And I remember saying to them once after watching an incredible performance, that was amazing, that was great. You know, do you ever think about producing a show with Black characters in them? And this person was my friend and somebody that I was very close to. And I just saw the blood drain from her face underneath all of that caked on makeup. And she was just sort of like flabbergasted, and she was like, oh my God, I've never thought about that. Yes, thank you for sharing that with me. I'm gonna do something about that. And so the next show that they did was like an all Black cast. And so I feel like I was heard, and moving forward, I think that there was, from that person specifically, like an effort to think about race in casting and in the stories that they chose to tell. And for me, I guess instead of that uphill battle where you had to fight with people and also constantly educate people, I felt like it was more important for me to also create that kind of space, right? And create the types of shows that I wanted to see. And that is one of the, I did that with Mahogany Mondays, and doing my Back to Black nights, or my Fierce Femme nights. And then I also, that's the reason that I produced Black Fridays at the Stud. You know, I think when the collective took over, even though the Stud was always someplace that I called home, I do think that there were, again, in Soma, there was more diversity, especially in the performance areas. But I really wanted to do something intentional for my community and create a show that celebrated Blackness, and also like allowed Black people to be their authentic selves and not just play caricatures of Blackness, which I find oftentimes in drag shows, like whenever a character is not white, their ethnicity sort of becomes the joke, right? And it is performed in a very slapstick, sort of like hyper Black or hyper Asian or whatever sort of way, again, where their ethnicity becomes a joke. And I wanted to provide a space where people could do that if they wanted to have an ironic moment and have like a dialogue around, why this stereotypes exist and how they play out and how that, like you can really do that through. I wanted to provide a space where that was welcome, but also like where you could just be yourself and show the diversity of what it means to be Black, because Black people are not a monolith. It's not a monolithic culture, and we look all sorts of different ways, behave all sorts of different ways, have different tastes in music. And I wanted to show that through the DJs that I booked that were all Black. I wanted to show that through the performers of various genders, of various sizes, of various skin tones of Black that performed at my venue. And I also wanted to make sure that there was a black person that greeted you at the door, and that the person that was taking your picture was Black. And if I could get it, the bartender was also Black. So I just wanted to create a space where we could be ourselves. And I think the real magic of it for me was the backstage, because I don't think I've ever felt more comfortable. I want to say in my life, but I almost don't think that's an exaggeration, because I think in so many places that we are as Black people, we are constantly on guard. We have to make sure that not only that we are safe by what's going on, but that like all these other people around us don't feel endangered by our presence, right? And so creating that space backstage where it was an all Black cast and the focus was around the celebration of Blackness, and where people kind of knew that and knew that everybody was somewhat on the same page, or that at least there was that assumption. It just felt like you would go backstage and just let your burdens down and you could be yourself, and you just had the best time backstage. And
that's cool to hear that. You know, let's bring us to present, because we've been talking about our history and our backgrounds and everything. And so let's bring us to why we're having this courageous conversation. One of the reasons why I brought it to the table is because we had a racist incident happen to us at the People's March in Castro. And one of the things I wanted to do, and Juanita and I wanted to do, was bring that to the forefront. But let people hear some histories and some pain points of what we go through our life in the Castro and where we are now in 2020. We had a situation where DJ Black was one of our DJs, and we took the People's March from Polk Street to the Civic Center up to the Castro, had a great party, met up with Pride is a Riot people, and joined together and had a great pride. Well, we were told by Mendelman's office that, and with them standing there, Raphael Mendelman and Tom, that we need to shut down. Now, that to me was the most racist thing that they could say to us all day. And they equated it not so much one-on-one, but they equated it to the fact that there was damage that has happened in the Castro. So when I confronted them, it was a whole different dialogue. So that to me is, if you are having that type of implicit bias from the very top of the chain that runs or manages that district, then no wonder the Merchants Association is the way it is. No wonder people who go in there are the way they are. So where we need to start changing is from the top and work from there in order for us to even have a sliver of representation in the Castro, because I don't know why we have never had pop-ups in those storefronts that have been closed forever. You know, we can bring brown and we can bring BIPOC people into those areas, give them a chance. If they succeed and like it, then really the association could push for them to have presence. So with that said, what have you experienced in 2020? And Juanita, I'm gonna go with you first.
Well, I mean, I am not the person that is going to pretend that I have all the answers. There's a lot of failures of diversity, especially economic ones in our community. I think moving forward now in 2020, I like your idea of getting some of those other spaces open, whether it's a pop-up. I mean, why doesn't Juanita More have a restaurant in the Castro?
Thank you.
That should happen.
Right.
But it's difficult, and it's a very hard and difficult process to obtain. Now, I've tried to get and run a restaurant in the Castro, and it's a lot of work. There's a lot of layers. You know, a lot of the properties there were sold in the mid-'80s when people were dying of AIDS. A lot of the people that bought those properties own those properties now and are older. A lot of them don't live in the city. And a lot of them just look at that as income. There is nothing else attached to it, just income. So that for me was one of the first things that was, that really slowed me down in trying to get into a space there. Many of the businesses there, you know, are owned by people that love me, that have supported me, that I've worked with for decades. And sometimes it's above them. It's also the people that own the property. but we need to find a way to get in there. And I do think that we have a great new board on the Castro Cultural District. And I think that that should be something that they really want to address. And I'm hoping they do.
Yes. And honey, you're associated with that, right? No? Oh, sorry.
No, I mean, I helped to draft the cultural district legislation. I, founded the transgender cultural district, but I'm not directly involved in the Castro Cultural District just because I did help with the formation of the leather one. And then I was like, okay, I don't need to be a part of every single culture.
Okay. But so are the missions or the objectives similar in each district? And then there's some uniqueness? No, there's all different.
It just depends. I mean, it's all over. I think that the main goal of cultural districts in creating them was to prevent the continuing displacement of communities, historically disenfranchised communities. So, that was the basis, but then each cultural district and each community has their own goals. For some, it is much more about preserving the businesses that exist there in the sort of commercial corridors. For others, it's more about maintaining affordable housing and advocating for more affordable housing. For others, it's about their cultural institutions, and and for many, it's all of the above. But I think there's a lot of autonomy between districts, and each one looks very different for a variety.
Okay. So maybe one of our shows we can do is have representation from each one of those districts and come onto our show and really lay it out with what their plans or their long-term plans are and what they can be doing short-term. That might be an interesting show for our audience. If you think
that's a great idea.
Yeah, if you think that's a good show, can you go ahead and say +1 or yes or something like that?
One thing I do want to mention is that I believe that the Castro Cultural District is looking for an executive director right now. So
okay.
Because once they get an executive director, they can hopefully start to make some progress on some of these goals. So I've got their Facebook and website if you're interested in applying, and I think that I've heard that the application is due on the 17th.
Okay, all right, great. Yeah, so go ahead, Black.
When the thing happened down there, when you guys organized the march, there were people. What happened that any of the destruction of the property actually never came from the queer people that were there. That destruction happened with other folks who were trying to distract from what was going on. So I just wanted you to know that had nothing to do with what you guys were doing. And I think that's something that should be addressed with whoever is running that particular district, that he knew that had nothing to do with what the people and the organizers who brought that there, so.
Absolutely. And that's what, and good point, Black, because that's what had me upset the most, is because we had an incredible pride. We had thousands of people that were enjoying themselves, and even till that point. So to put those two things together and have our party take the brunt of it was not fair.
I mean,
Just not fair.
The one thing that I did see was the U.S. Bank, and I was like, if somebody had really broken to the U.S. Bank, wouldn't there be some alarms that went off or something like that? It was something weird about that particular, because that was the only thing that I saw that had got vandalized. But it looked like it was something that happened prior to us even getting there.
Right. So that's why that has to be a deeper dialogue, because that was pretty much racism 101. And like I said, when it comes from the top, it just really needs to be looked at. We have 5 more minutes, and I just wanted to let the audience know that our next show is on Saturday, September 19th, same bat channel at 6 o'clock. And we're going to be doing this show every 3rd Saturday. And if you want to chip in and send us some coins, either for the panel or for People's March or for the Committee for Queer Justice who sponsored this, we are Venmo PM_2020. I'm sorry? No, it's not always the same topic. I have the production crew here whispering in my ear, interrupting my flow, but hey. So the topic next time, and we have to talk about this, but we're thinking about doing race and policing. But we may have to extend what we were talking about here. We may have to have some of those folks on the show and really do a deeper dive of what really happened at the People's March. So Juanita and I will get together and look at that. But we have some things come up from the audience. So Ellen, did you see anything from the audience that you want to
Can
say?
I pipe in with one last thing before we go to audience questions?
We're not going to audience questions. We have 4 minutes.
Oh, okay.
But go ahead, say one more
Yeah,
thing.
I wanted to say that I like a solution that I've seen, because I love to share my story, but I also love to share solutions, is one that I've always kind of imagined is happening is not just putting the onus on POC to, you know, pull ourselves up by the bootstraps and take over things, because that's not a reasonable request for a lot of us, is to actually have bar owners, managers, staff, and things like that actually work alongside POC and, you know, create models that we can follow, you know, teach us financial literacy, teach us how to petition for these things and to write grants. You know, there's a lot of money that circulates in the Castro amongst a certain few people, and they have those skill sets that they could share. And that would be my request to anyone watching this who is wondering, how can I help? What can I do? Is to offer those things that you just kind of see as parts of your wheelhouse or how you run things. Those are tools that can allow POC to empower ourselves and to take the initiative to start our own parties, to do these things, to save up enough money, and to bankroll those things. You know, pony up your money, skip that weekend Palm Springs trip, you know, ask a DJ if they've played recently. Something as simple as that. Go outside of your circle. That would be my request to everyone who's wondering how they can help, because that's often the question. How can I help? You know, show up with resources, show up with knowledge, and show up with a respect for history. You know, we need to have more landmarks about the queer history that is POC in the Castro. It's a lot of, you know, I don't like stepping on the POC history. That's the only POC history I see in the Castro is the, you know, the Walk of Fame. I don't like stepping on Sylvester's face. I don't like stepping on Frida Kahlo's face. I'd love to see murals. I'd love to see, you know, an installation about history. You know, there's tons of queer historians here who can provide that information.
Make it happen. That is such a great idea. Great idea. Thank you for that, Mason. That's awesome.
Ambassador Mason.
There you go. I mean, we're going to put you in charge of all the murals of people of color, queer people of color.
Yeah.
I'm going to just read real quick what one of our panelists said, and then we're going to have to we'll probably get cut off. They said that, I'm wondering if there might be, this comes from Tina Valentina Gary. I'm wondering if there might be interest in the future after maybe some spaces open up post COVID-19, where POC band together to create a welcoming community space that is also a bar or restaurant environment. Time for a collective venture. In Paris, there's a transgender queer bar that is awesome, and it is a collective. So thank you for that. And then there's also interest, and maybe that's what we do for the next panel, Juanita. There's tons of interest of us putting together all the cultural centers and having a representative of each cultural center be on our show. So maybe that's where we go next. And we'll talk about
I love that.
Yeah. And someone said next time we should do 90 minutes and not 60. All right. All right.
They're going to have to buy me a drink.
Yeah, exactly. That was from Lido Sandoval, who is one of our favorite activists. Thank you, Lido. That was awesome. And someone said, shut up, Lido. So, and we're getting a lot of thank yous to the panel. It was a great hour of discussion. I'd like to thank my co-host, Juanita More. I'd like to thank Honey Mahogany. I'd like to thank DJ Black. And I'd love to thank Mason J. And let's do this.
Yeah, for those of you who are interested in starting co-ops and collectives, actually the Stud produces a podcast where we just talked about our own process. So if you want to check out our latest Stud story, it will be posted on the Stud SF website. We talk about how we formed the Stud. And so that's—
What is that, studsf.com?
StudsF.com is the Stud's website, and our Stud story, I think it should be coming out soon, but it's all about how we formed the Stud Collective and sort of saved the Stud. And speaking of the Stud, I'm going to head right off to do Drag Alive right now. I'm hosting with my drag sister, Dulce de Leche. Okay. So if anyone's interested, show DJ at 7:30, show at 8.
Okay. And the other thing I wanted to announce as well is that, again, our show is going to be the third Saturday of every month. The next show is September 19th. And we'll look into the cultural centers. Also, there is the gala that is happening today for Harvey Milk Democratic Club. So you might as well check them out. This is right after this show. So, yes, Black, I'm trying to end. It's going to cut us off.
BYB.
Go ahead. Go ahead. Go ahead.
I'm gonna do it a BYB party. That's what I do. It's online. We're also doing some stuff for social distancing stuff outside. So if you would like to check it out, BYB parties.
Okay. Thank you. And then Juanita, do you have a closing comment?
Thank you, Alex. You're an amazing host, an amazing activist, and I'm so happy to call you my friend. And this is the sexiest panel that I've seen on Zoom in my entire Zooming life.
Well, now. All right, you all, let's do this.
I don't know. Oakland's really hot right now.
Yeah. Okay. Love you guys and thank you.
Thank you.
With you.
Thank you.
Thank you, audience. We appreciate you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye, everybody.